Is God of the Bible and the Quran a racist God? Does God use logical fallacies in his scriptures and so-called holy books? Let me take a step back and explain first. Overgeneralization or stereotyping is a very common logical fallacy, a fallacy or a mental phenomenon that we have become more familiar with, especially in the past 20 years. The use of stereotypes or overgeneralization has become an area of research in various scientific fields, such as modern psychology, sociology, neuroscience, and cognitive behaviors. This fallacy of overgeneralization has many forms and levels, but the most common and most racist out of all is negative stereotypes. In our common languages, you may hear expressions like Jews are stingy, English people are emotionally cold, or Egyptians are inherently religious people. We tend to generalize excessively and impose specific patterns on our human perceptions. We stereotype people and do not want to acknowledge that within every group there are individuals who do not possess the qualities attributed to the entire group. It is an evolutionary trait to save brain power. But with the rise of human rights, anti-racism advocacy, and the advancement of sciences in areas like modern psychology and cognitive behavior, more attention has been given to the fact that overgeneralization and stereotyping are the root of racism and a fundamental cause of discrimination among people and social classes. As a result, overgeneralization and stereotyping have been considered a racist behavior, and in many cases, among human rights violations. In this video, I'm going to talk about why we resort to overgeneralization and how this human shortcoming has seeped into our religious texts. Is God of the Bible and the Quran a racist God? Or is he innocent of racism and overgeneralization? Before I jump into the topic, if you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, please hit the subscribe button under this video right now. It makes a huge difference to the channel's success and growth if you subscribe. So please do that now. Let's go. First thing first, we need to understand what overgeneralization or excessive generalization mean before we explore whether God or religion has fallen into this human error and carried on racism. The field of neurology and cognitive behavior tells us why we resort to stereotyping and excessive generalization as a cognitive mechanism. Generalization in itself is a cognitive mechanism that saves the human brain from excessive efforts because it cannot deal with reality in all its separate units. Thus, it resorts to generalize to conserve energy and facilitate thinking and organizing patterns of knowledge. This is achieved by grouping characteristics together. For example, when you meet one African person with dark skin, then another, and a third one, the brain uses the mechanism of generalization and concludes that Africans are dark-skinned people. This is called logical generalization or non-excessive generalization, where the conclusion is logically justified. On the other hand, excessive generalization is when you meet one terrorist who has a beard and claims to be a Muslim. Then you see another terrorist on television who also has a beard and holds a Quran. And a third one in the newspaper, a Muslim with a beard who carried out a terrorist attack. Then you excessively generalize that any Muslim with a beard is a terrorist and you should fear and avoid all Muslims. This is called excessive generalization and a racist stereotyping behavior. Despite being a cognitive mechanism understandable for its protective function and energy-saving properties, it is still considered a human rights violation and a logical fallacy. It is never accepted and never okay. This excessive generalization is a crime of racism that we have become more and more aware of as human rights have advanced in modern times. We have begun to spread awareness among people about the severity of this issue and the limitations of the human mind. It is not acceptable to claim that all women have maternal instinct, because some women may not have that, and there are women capable of harming their children. It is not acceptable to claim that all men are physically or emotionally strong, because some of them may not be able to endure pain. This is excessive generalization. Even if statistics support certain characteristics, it is not valid to overgeneralize and stereotype, because each person has their own psychological state, characteristics, and abilities that may not fit their ethnicity, gender, or race. The conclusion is that excessive generalization and stereotyping, whether in positive or negative claims, is a mental limitation that prevents us from dealing with each person as an individual with their unique circumstances, characteristics, abilities, and personality. Now, that explained, how does this lengthy introduction relate to religions, God the Creator, and religious texts? It is undoubtedly very relatable. From this perspective, religions portray God as having the limitations of humans, as if he has a brain that functions in the same flawed way as the human brain. Thus, he doesn't realize that humans are diverse, and each individual possesses their own traits. Within every group, there are individuals who do not possess the same characteristics attributed to their entire group. However, it appears that God himself fell into this fallacy of overgeneralization and stereotyping. As human thought and sciences advanced, along with the progress of human rights, we came to understand that it is not acceptable to deal with any person and judge them based on their ethnic affiliation. It is not valid to assume a specific attribute for all Egyptians, generalize a certain feature to all women, or assume a characteristic that can be applied to all Muslims, or Christians, Arabs, or Jews. This is excessive generalization, and it leads to stereotyping and racism. So when you come across a Quranic verse like, "You will surely find the most bitter towards the believers to be the Jews and the polytheists," Quran 5:82, you see an overgeneralization about the Jews being enemies of the believers. But in reality, there are many Jews who actually defend the rights of Palestinian Muslims and oppose Zionist movements. So the excessive generalization ignores the fact that each group has diverse individuals and falls into the trap of stereotyping them. And God of the Quran falls into that. Moreover, this excessive generalization also makes God appear contradictory, because he seems unable to distinguish between different categories within the same group. For example, one moment he says that you will find the most gracious to the believers are those who call themselves Christians, Surah 5, verse 82, implying that Christians love and support Muslim believers. Yet at the same time, he says, you will never find people who believe in Allah and the last day loyal to those who defy Allah and his messenger, Surah 58, verse 22, implying that Christians do not have love or affection for Muslim believers, since they do not accept the Muslim Prophet. Also in verse 120 in Surah 2, it puts both Christians and Jews in one basket. Never will the Jews or Christians be pleased with you until you follow their faith. Well, I thought that the Jews were the most bitter towards Muslims, while the Christians are the most gracious towards them. Now, in this verse, both Christians and Jews will never be pleased with Muslim believers. This inconsistency arises due to the excessive generalization, as it doesn't differentiate between different groups or individuals, and puts all Christians or all Jews in one basket. For Christians wants to be the closest and dearest to Muslim believers, and another time to be disloyal and distant from Muslim believers. And if you think that I'm only criticizing the Quran because I'm Christian or I'm Jewish, then you're wrong. Let me show you that Jewish and Christian scriptures are not necessarily portrayed in a better light. The Bible also portrays God, the Creator, in the same fallacious manner, using excessive generalization and stereotyping. For example, when you come across a text in the Holy Scriptures or the Torah saying the Egyptians enslaved the children of Israel with violence. You have to question it. The Egyptians enslaved the children of Israel with violence, and not a single fair person among them. The text then continues in several other places, stating, I have heard the groaning of the people of Israel whom the Egyptians hold as slaves. However, we know that there were Egyptians who supported and helped the children of Israel, like the Egyptian midwife who refused to harm them, and the other Egyptians who gave them their gold. But no, God seems incapable of differentiating between good Egyptians and bad Egyptians, and calls them all by the Egyptians. It is an excessive racial generalization, portraying all Egyptians as one violent nation against God and his people. And, as usual, some Christian apologists might argue, you know, Adam, it is not God who generalizes. Rather, he knows our human limitations. So, for ease, he said the Egyptians, but he didn't mean all Egyptians. Really, bro? You think that this is a convincing response? What about when God decided to save his people? So he sent down his angel to kill all the firstborn of the Egyptians. Wasn't that excessive generalization on God's behalf? An angel who does not differentiate any house without the blood marking on the door was struck, killing all the firstborn of all Egyptians, whether human or animals. Even the firstborn of the innocent people were killed if their houses were not marked with the blood, just because they're not Jews, they're Egyptian. This is a clear example of excessive generalization in the text and pure racism. And sorry, it was not due to our limitations. It was due to God's limitations in this text, as he or his angel could not differentiate between one person and another. So he chose to be racist, punishing the entire Egyptian nation, unable to distinguish between individuals. Anyone who doesn't have the blood markings on the door should be killed. Furthermore, it is not only this instance of racism. Throughout the religious texts, whether it is the Torah, the Holy Bible, or the Quran, Allah or God cannot speak without being racist, without stereotyping, without excessive generalization. Today, we consider these practices of stereotyping as human rights violations, and unfortunately, religious scriptures are full of them. Whether it is Jews, Christians, Egyptians, Assyrians, Canaanites, etc., God or Allah in these religious texts knows no other way to be anything other than racist. He does not understand that within every group there are people who do not possess the characteristics of their entire group. And whenever he sent an angel or a command, it was one command rules all. No individuals exempt. Racism at its best. I'm sorry, not meaning to offend, but your religious texts are wrong. There is no such thing as the Jews will never be pleased with you, or the Christians will love and support you, or all Muslims are terrorists, or this nation is corrupt and deserves destruction, because humans have good and bad individuals, regardless of their ethnicity, lineage, race, or nationality. However, it seems that God, as depicted in these religious texts, does not comprehend this fact. Or perhaps, entertain this idea for a moment, perhaps these texts are not from the divine, since God or the divine cannot be racist. Peace and love to you all.